6th canto, first chapter, 8th verse, the English translation. Therefore, before one's next death comes, as long as one's body is strong enough, one should quickly adopt the process of atonement according to Scripture. Otherwise, one's time will be lost and the reactions of his sins will increase. As an expert physician diagnoses and treats a disease according to its gravity, one should undergo atonement according to the severity of one's sins. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The Dharma Shastras, like the Manu Samhita, prescribed that a man who has committed murder should be hanged and his own life sacrificed in atonement. Previously, this system was followed all over the world, but since people are becoming atheists, they are stopping capital punishment. Herein is said that a physician who knows how to diagnose a disease prescribes medicine accordingly. If the disease is very serious, the medicine must be very strong. The weight of a murderous sin is very great, and therefore, according to Manu Samhita, a murderer should be killed. By killing a murderer, the government shows mercy to him, because if a murderer is not killed in this life, he will be killed and forced to suffer many times in future lives. Since people do not know about the next life and the intricate workings of nature, they manufacture their own laws, but they should properly consult the established injunctions of the Scriptures and act accordingly. In India, even today, the Hindu community often takes advice from expert scholars regarding how to counteract sinful activities. In Christianity also, there is a process of confession and atonement. Therefore, atonement is required, and atonement must be undergone according to the gravity of one's sinful acts. This is certainly true. We're all about disease right now. The more you delay, the more you hesitate to shut it down, the more the curve goes up, and the more people are infected, the more serious those infections are. Everybody's talking about flattening the curve so that the infections don't exponentially get away from you. This is also talking about the process of atonement, which flattens the curve. You commit sins one after another, you get a multiplication effect, which you definitely, trust me, don't want as a factor in your future. Also, another thing is that by not confessing or not by atoning for your sins, you become insensitive to them. You become numb. I mentioned this before. They didn't let murderers act as jurors. They didn't let butchers act as murderers in capital punishment trials in the Middle Ages because they were inclined to be merciful. Merciful. But here mercy is defined in a different way. Mercy upon the murderer would be to inflict capital punishment according to Manu Samhita, because he will atone in this life for the sin that he did and then start fresh in his next life. So although on one level it may seem cruel for the state to assume that role of capital punishment, and there are all kinds of arguments, pros and cons, still it's a blessing, it's actually a mercy on the murderer to endure. And Prabhupada once, in one purport, he says life imprisonment or capital punishment. So he kind of mitigates it a little bit. But you don't want to have to face that in your next life, because he says then many times, here in this life, you can atone for that by one stroke, with one stroke. But if you neglect to atone for it in this life, if you put it off and put it off and put it off, or somehow or other erroneously think that you can sidestep it altogether by transitioning into another life, that's not going to happen. In fact, in the next life, it's going to multiply. And you definitely don't want that factor in your future. There are many different types of atonement, just like there are many different medicines, many different prescriptions. There isn't one pill in the pharmacist that will take care of all of your disease. Each pill has a specific purpose. Some of them will really knock you out. Some of them, like chemotherapy. Others will have have serious side effects, serious symptoms. All the small writing on TV, they says you can do this to increase your libido. Of course, you may get stroke, heart attack, paralysis, dementia. They run through all that really quickly. But they're legally obliged to say that as part of their promotion because those side effects are real.
It's also an advertising ploy.
So you don't want to delay or defer facing your shortcomings, facing your mistakes, facing your bad choices, and atoning for them. You want to flatten the curve. But flattening the curve does not get rid of the disease. It just keeps the disease from having a runaway effect. And that's the shortcoming of atonement itself, as will be discussed elsewhere in the Srimad Bhagavatam. You can commit a sin due to lusty desires or uncontrollable senses, poor fund of knowledge, and you can atone for that particular sin. But how do you deal with the tendency itself to cross the line over and over again? How do you deal with the pap bij, the seed of sinful desires that sits within the heart in the first place? And atonement won't do that. Prabhupada gives the example that due to promiscuity, someone contracts an STD, and atonement to get rid of it is very painful. I think you have to take a big needle, multiple shots right in the stomach. It's very painful. And initially he thinks, well, I'll never do that again. But memory fades. He forgets the excruciating pain that's involved in the cure. His lusty desires raise their ugly head again, and he does it again. Even though he's atoned for the transgression, it still hasn't removed the sinful desire seed that caused him to do it in the first place. And he finds himself back there again. Someone joked that a bad Christian is someone who sins on Saturday night, atones for it by confessing on Sunday, with every intention of doing it again next Saturday. In fact, there are 10 offenses against the holy name, and the worst one, in fact, is to commit sinful activities on the strength of chanting the holy names of the Lord. To think that I can make mistakes, that I can allow my senses to pull me in the wrong direction, and then I'll just do some penances or austerities, give in charity, I'll confess, and that'll eradicate the effects of that sinful activity. And one or two times possibly, but if you have a mentality of sinning, atoning, sinning, atoning, sinning, atoning, there's really no rectification. That mentality would be defined as incorrigible. And such a person can never, not in this lifetime, attain perfection in spiritual life. It's compared to the elephant taking bath. If you've ever been in South or Southeast Asia, I was in Thailand when I was a young person, and I remember sitting at a restaurant which was kind of jutting. The eating area was out over this river, and it was evening time. And this was a part of Thailand. This village had never seen a white man before. I was the first white man that they'd ever seen. I was quite an object of curiosity. So we're eating. I was with a Thai and a Chinese guy, the three of us, and we were looking out. It was evening, and the elephants, they didn't have trucks. This was in the 60s. They didn't even have trucks in this village. The elephants did all the hard work. And it was evening, so the work had been done, and it was time for bathing the elephants, and there were at least half a dozen elephants down in the river there. The elephants were throwing water over themselves, and the elephant keepers were scrubbing all the little cracks and crevices and all. It was a wonderful, idyllic scene. I still have it in my mind more than 50 years later. But the interesting thing was that as soon as they'd been cleaned, squeaky cleaned, first thing the elephants did was go out and roll in the dust. And I guess that does something for their skin. I guess it has a beneficial effect. But Result is that they're no longer squeaky clean anymore. So a man who commits sinful activities and then tries to clean himself by atonement or confession or giving in charity or doing some austerity, without dealing with the root cause of the sinful desire seed in the first place, is like the elephant taking bath. And if you're going to deal with it, you should deal with it when you're strong, it says in this verse. How many people think that, well, I'll just deal with these kinds of issues in old age? And it's true, old age mitigates the pull of the senses. As a 73-year-old, I can console you that it won't always be this bad. As time goes on, the urges of the senses kind of in and of themselves abate. But that doesn't say anything about the mind. If you've habituated yourself to hedonism and sensuality, if you've indulged scenes, touching, tasting, and smelling, when you're young, sure, the senses are not so strong. They're not quite so demanding when you're old, but the mind is still hankering, or lamenting, you might say. Oh, I used to do this, and I used to do this. And there's by Yeats, there's a song of the old pensioner. He said, I can't remember all the lyrics, but he says, my chair was closest to the fire in every company, and we spoke of love and war before time transfigured me. You see, now I shelter beneath a tree from the rain, and the rain is metaphorically old age. And then he's not very happy. His last line of the poem is, I spit into the face of time. He says, but the beauties that I loved are in my memory. I spit into the face of time that has transfigured me. What are we seeing here? We're seeing a guy who was obviously quite debonair, quite dashing, quite handsome. As a youth, he was in the middle of the conversation closest to the fire. People hung on his words. He had girls willful. But now he's an old man, and he recognizes that the girls aren't turning their heads to him anymore. The younger guys don't care for what he has to say. But he's not okay with that. He's not okay with that. He's not okay with the progressive march of the body. And his mind is still very bitter and very resentful. He says, I spit into, well, that does a lot of good. I mean, that's a really good use of your time and your mental energy to spit into the face of time. It's like spitting into the wind, and it comes right back in your face. Nobody can surmount the inevitable, all-devouring effects of time. So, therefore, it's recommended never to put off spiritual life, not even for one moment. When I was president in San Francisco Temple, we had a South Indian gentleman. His last name was Reddy. And he had been coming quite regularly and getting quite interested in Krishna consciousness. He had a wife and 2 kids. And one Sunday, he came to me and he said, next week I'm going to become a life member. Next week I'm going to give $1,111. I said, okay, well, great. Have a great week. We'll see you next week. The next week came by, and the following week came by, and the following week came by. And finally, I said to somebody, I said, what happened to Mr. Reddy? He said, well, he'd vacationed in Yosemite a few weeks ago, went off the road, and died in an auto accident. And so I thought, well, you shouldn't really put it off, should you? When Ravana was dying, Ram sent Lakshman to Ravana and said, see if you can get some last-minute advice from him. You know, sometimes people who did wrong things can tell you what they did wrong and help you not follow in their footsteps. So Lakshman went over, and Ravana said, if there's something auspicious, it should be done immediately. On the other hand, something inauspicious should be put off. And he said, I knew how to take seawater, salt water, and with mantras, transform it into fresh water. I knew that. We don't have that technology to this very day. It's prohibitively expensive by mechanical means to transform salt water to fresh water, but imagine the good it would do. One of the biggest problems facing rural communities all over the world is lack of fresh water. It's probably our number one problem. Ravana could have solved that thousands of years ago. It wouldn't exist today. He had the technology, and it didn't have to build factories or treatment plants, just very simply. But he put it off, he put it off, he put it off, even though it would have been an incredibly auspicious thing to do. Imagine the punya that he would have gotten for everybody who now doesn't have fresh water, who would have had fresh water had he acted timely, but he didn't. On the other hand, he knew it was inauspicious to be attracted to and kidnap Ram's wife, Sita. He knew that was inauspicious. And he knew that he should have put that off and done the other quickly, but he didn't. He had things topsy-turvy. Thus he lay dead on the battlefield, telling Lakshman what not to do in his life. And we're encouraged not to put it off, and especially if you're young, now is the time. In spite of the fact that the senses are strong, in spite of the fact that the senses are more difficult to control, if you make progress, even some progress in your youth, that will stand you in great stead when you're old. The mind will be peaceful and be able to take advantage that when the senses abate, when the senses are not monopolizing so much of your time and your energy, yes, that's the time to increase and enhance, to take your Krishna consciousness to the next level. People whose minds are attached to sense gratification, they fear, they dread death, because it means the end of all eating, sleeping, all sensual indulgence, which they base their life on. But devotees who can gradually wean themselves of sense gratification through the progressive practice of Krishna consciousness have nothing to fear from death, just the opposite. They actually look forward to death. They get to give up this old and weak, arthritic, deaf, blind, dumb, material body, and they get to have a new one. If they've executed their Krishna consciousness nicely under the direction of a bona fide spiritual master, they'll get their spiritual body. But even if they don't get their spiritual body, they'll get another material body, which will be enhanced due to their devotional service and due to their attachment to Krishna. And with that enhanced body, then they can do better service. It's just like if you have an old jalopy that spews smoke and it rattles and there's cracks in the windshield and the windshield wipers don't work and the heater doesn't work and it goes only 30 miles an hour, you're not going to be sad to trade in that old jalopy for a car that runs smoothly without polluting the atmosphere, that has a nice heater in it and all. But when one's in Krishna consciousness, the change of body is not bewildering. Dehi no shmin yata dehi kumaram yovaram tata dehantara praptiristadandavoyate. As the embodied soul passes in this life from boyhood to youth and into old age, similarly the soul inevitably passes to another body at the time of death. But the difference between someone who's indulged in sense gratification and one who's practiced Krishna consciousness is that the Krishna conscious person is not bewildered by such a change. For a Krishna conscious person, it's no more traumatic than just changing clothes from old, useless clothes to new ones. Prahlad Maharaj also tells his schoolmates, they're only 5 years old. Someone may say, true, well, that's pretty far out, 5-year-olds are meant to play. They're meant to engage in mindless pursuits. Why are you imposing this heavy burden of Krishna consciousness on them? Well, I'm not. But Prahlad Maharaj, a great soul who achieved the perfection of life, went back to home, back to Godhead, encouraged his own schoolmates, Kaumaram means 5 years old, Kaumaram acharat pragna, dharmam bhagavatamiha, durabam manusham janma, tadapya dhruvam artidam. Prahlad says to his schoolmates, and he encouraged them to chant Hare Krishna and practice Krishna consciousness, eat prasadam, and they objected, said, Prahlad, we can do that later, we have plenty of time. Let's play now. And he said, why should we do that now? And Prahlad said, well, first of all, you don't know that you have plenty of time. especially in this modern age. We don't know that we have plenty of time. The American comedian, and this is 50 years ago, when things were much less dangerous. The American comedian Will Rogers said, in the old days, people used to live until they die, and now they just live until they get run over. And that was 50 years ago, and things have gotten a lot more dangerous. Terrorists, a lot more gangs, drugs, more suicide, more depression. It's much more dangerous now than it was when Will Rogers was speaking. So we're not guaranteed a certain span of life. And then Prahlad Maharaj breaks it down. Durapuni nikamani mohena chabadisha shesam griyashu shaktasha pramatasya. Pramata means one becomes mad. One becomes mad. In youth, first 20 years of one's life, one plays sports. Just mindlessly playing baseball, football, soccer. The last 20 years of one's life, one's mind is deteriorating. There's senility, there's, what do they call it, Alzheimer's. So there's 40 years right there. If you have 100 years, right, there's 40 years, you're down to 60. Now half your time you spend sleeping, so now you're down to 30 years. And then he says, particularly now, the best time of your life, between 20 and 40, when your mind and your senses are so strong, when you could really make some serious advancement in Krishna consciousness, that window, you could jump through that and capitalize it to become seriously Krishna conscious. What happens? People are mad after family life. Yatha griha chetushu tapta vitashya. One meets a woman, and then with the woman, one's activities, one's influence expand from the woman to children, to land, to businesses. And that's it. 100 years is gone. Even if you don't die prematurely, if you don't die untimely, still 100 years is gone. When is the time set aside for practicing Krishna consciousness? And Prahlad says, don't think that 5 years old is too early. Every moment is worth so much that you cannot buy it back with even millions and millions of gold coins. Each one of us is endowed by God with talents and abilities, and we're meant to use those to make a difference in the world. We each have a mission, and that mission is not something we can put off. Not something we can put off. We need to acknowledge that we have a very important mission, that our time is short, and become focused, not allow ourselves to get distracted. Fulfill the purpose for which God put us here. Put a smile on the face of the Lord. Said when the Pandavas came back from exile, they maintained a good attitude. They did the right thing even when the wrong thing was being done to them. They finally defeated their enemies. Yudhishthira ascended to the throne and justly ruled. You know what their reward was? After all that, 13 years of exile, a huge battle, they lost their cousin brothers, their friends. After all those trials and tribulations, their reward was that Krishna smiled at them and called them my good and faithful servants. And that satisfied them right down to the very depths of their souls. There was no greater reward. There was no greater goal or achievement they could have attained. So much so, they said to Krishna, let's do it again. Vipara shantu tasha tatajika babato darshana metsira apanar babadarshana. In the end, Krishna consciousness is a great adventure. And adventure, if you want adventure, if you want to rise to the call of adventure, do it when you're young. You know, people climb mountains, people windsurf, people win Olympic medals, not when they're 60 or 70 or even 50 or 40, but when they're young. So if you're young, you've got an incalculably valuable asset there. You've got strength, you've got power of memory, you've got time ahead of you, your voice is strong, your muscles are strong. Everything is auspicious for executing Krishna consciousness. Just like the day is divided into morning, afternoon, and evening. Evening is not good for spiritual life. Darkness, ghosts, spirits, thieves, snakes, move in the night. During the day when the sun is high, there's a lot of passion, a lot of competition, a lot of struggle. Make money, you want to get ahead, get promotion. So of the three sanjas, segments of the day, the morning is the one most suited for spiritual life. Get up in the morning, don't go to Facebook, don't look at your cell phone. Chant your mantra, do your slokas. Enrich yourself, fill yourself up, feast in the morning pre-dawn hours with spiritual values, spiritual nourishment, and that'll get you through the whole day. But if you miss those morning hours, there's really nothing you can do at noon, and especially not at night, to catch up. So similarly, youth can be compared to the wonderful, refreshing, early morning hours that we start each and every day. And every successful person knows that those hours are the most valuable hours. And whatever you want to accomplish, you need to get your traction in the morning. And I read once, not too long ago, that your success in terms of business and career, influence, money in the bank, property, your success in material terms is going to be directly proportional to the success you have in self-enrichment and self-improvement. So the morning hours are for ourselves. We need to be selfish about chanting, about reading, about nourishing ourselves first thing in the morning. And that will get us through, that will fuel us up, that will top us up, so that whatever happens during the day, we can override it with pure Krishna consciousness, like the lotus that's above the dirt and above the liquidity of the water. So similarly, youth is the same opportunity. When we're young, we need to chant, we need to cultivate Krishna consciousness, and even though the senses are strong, we need to start digging in our heels, laying some boundaries, some groundwork. Prabhupada never told us that we couldn't eat, but he said eat prasadam. He never told us that we couldn't raise a family, but he said do it according to Krishna conscious principles. He never even prohibited dancing. Dance at festivals, dance in front of the deities. Well, everything is really there in Krishna consciousness. The only thing that's missing are those elements by which we become overly and excessively attached to sense gratification. Sense gratification is there, but it's to please Krishna's senses. And when we learn to prioritize the pleasure of Krishna's senses, then we become more pleased than we could have ever possibly been by trying to independently satisfy our own senses. So we'll read the verse again, and then if you have any questions. So therefore, before one's next death comes, as long as one's body is strong enough, one should quickly adopt the process of atonement according to Scripture. Otherwise, one's time will be lost and the reactions of his sins will increase. No questions or comments?
I have some questions for you.
We'll limit you to two, okay?
Okay. I only have two.
All right.
All right, so the first question is just something you kind of said in passing, that people can't obtain spiritual perfection in the human form where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious about those who really focus on controlling their reactions to their own mind and their reactions to their dealings with others and their reactions to Mother Nature, like conquering those three miseries. Can they not become liberated in this lifetime if they establish that, if they're capable?
The ultimate atonement, which addresses directly the root cause of sinful activities, is to become Krishna conscious. It's said that, you can burn out a field. A field may have so many weeds. You can burn it out, and the weeds are gone on one level, but the seeds are still underneath the ground. So the weeds will come back, or the unwanted plants will come back. But if you flood the field, then those seeds rot with the excessive moisture. They rot. And so atonement is kind of like burning the field, but the seeds remain, and then they reappear. Whereas chanting Hare Krishna, enjoying prasadam, the association of devotees, attending festivals, it's like flooding your heart with love, with satisfaction, with fulfillment. So it's like flooding the field so that that seed of sinful desires actually rots where it sits and you're not bothered by it. And if you adopt this ultimate process of atonement, even as a young person, you don't have to be harassed and bothered by the appetites and the demands of the mind and the senses. The mind and the senses are there, but they've been effectively dovetailed in the service of the Lord. So what was your second question?
Yeah, in the sastras or scriptures, as you're calling them on the movie camera there, where are those found? Where are they found the atonement in the scriptures?
Manu Samhita. And many of the atonements that are described in the Manu Samhita, according to modern day thinking, are quite severe.
Do we have that?
People would recoil against some of the recommendations in the Manu Samhita as being too cruel. I'm not going to take a position one way or another, but the reasoning behind it is that if you deal with it right away, then you keep it from multiplying in the future. But we're not recommending the extreme measures of the Manu Samhita. I'm not coming out necessarily on behalf of capital punishment or any of that stuff, because it's
But of course I want to read it.
Because it's not the complete solution to the problems that we have. The complete solution, the ultimate activity of the living being, is to engage enthusiastically and wholeheartedly and fulfillingly in the devotional service of the Lord. So that's the ultimate atonement. And even if it's so powerful that even if you fall down once or twice, you don't have to do anything separate to address that particular fall down. All you have to do is get up and continue performing devotional service, and the sinful desire itself will be removed in due course of time. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So thank you, Juan Flores, Frank Gavin, Alona Smith from Riverside. Hi, Alona. Sorry we had to cancel the Riverside Festival of Colors. Alona and her Anamkara Yoga School were fully committed to giving a whole menu of classes at the Riverside Festival of Colors on March 14th. But unfortunately, the governor had already banned any gatherings of over 100 people, so we had to cancel that. But we love your spirit. We love your determination. Thank you, friend. Haribol. Thanks to everyone for joining us. If you give a little heart or you give a little like, Facebook notes that, and it goes into their algorithm, and so it helps to distribute these kinds of classes and little get-togethers to a larger group of people. So if you feel that there's been any benefit, then you can help others to intersect with this by just giving a little wave or giving a little like or giving a little heart. And we love you too, and we'll be back together most likely tomorrow. Hare Krishna.